to tell me. Perfect. All right. Well, with that, I'll go ahead and say good morning, almost afternoon, everyone. Thanks so much for joining our November Quick Tips. Most of you are familiar faces, but for those of you who aren't, hi, I'm Morgan Stentz. I'm the roving archivist for the state of Wyoming. Before we start digging into our topic today, I just have a bit of housekeeping stuff to go over and some acknowledgements. So first and foremost, I'd like to thank our sponsors for today. This program is only made possible thanks to the American Heritage Center, the Wyoming State Archives, and the Wyoming State Historic Records and Advisory Board. We are funded by grants made available through SHRAB and by the National Historic Publications and Records Commission, which those funds are administered by the Wyoming State Archives through the Department of State Parks and Cultural Resources. Man, quite the mouthful of all the different titles and stuff, but it's fun. Thank you to all of those programs and all of the people who make this possible. And with that out of the way, I'd like to remind you all again that this session will be recorded and made available through the State Archives YouTube page for future reference and for those who couldn't make it today. And then finally, I just would like to ask you all to save your questions for the end, where we'll have a little Q&A. If you have questions during the presentation and you're nervous about missing the wording that you would like to use or forgetting it in the meantime, please feel free to drop them in the chat and I will make sure that we get to it during the Q&A session. And with that, I'm going to hand this off to Molly Marcusse, our speaker for today's presentation.
Well, hi, everyone. Thanks for joining. Some familiar faces for me in the crowd, too, so I appreciate that. I am the collections manager at the University of Wyoming Art Museum. I've been in this position for a little over 2 years, and pest management is a big part of what I do here. So today we're going to talk about pest management for archives and museums, some strategies, some easy to implement policies and procedures to hopefully get your pest under control. There we go. So just a quick overview of our session. We'll start by talking about the fundamentals of integrated pest management. We'll talk about some prevention strategies, how to monitor and detect for pests, safe response methods for when pests do get into your collections, staff training and policies, building an integrated pest management program, and then we'll have about 15 minutes at the end for questions and answers. But I wanted to start just by asking, what pests have you encountered in your institution? Feel free to throw those in the chat, or if you want to unmute and share. I know you've all encountered pests.
I know I've definitely seen mice and spiders.
Spiders are a big one, yeah.
Oh, fun.
Any others? Everyone's just feeling shy today. I also have issues with camel crickets here in Laramie at the Art Museum. We've had birds get in sometimes, lots of different things. Moths are always an issue. So what are the fundamentals of integrated pest management? First of all, integrated pest management is a prevention-focused approach that aims to maintain the safety of the collections and the people. We use the least toxic methods first, and there's an emphasis on documentation and monitoring to help you see if there are any trends that come up a certain time of year or if things are getting worse. Some common pests in archives and museums, we already talked about a few of these, but insects are probably the most prevalent. Insects that can be dangerous to collection material are silverfish, book lice, carpet beetles, and moths. And as I mentioned, some other ones that come up are camel crickets, mites, flies, spiders. And while they may not directly cause damage to your collections the same way like book lice is going to eat through paper, you still don't want them around. Any sort of insect is going to cause damage and will potentially attract other pests as well. rodents, as we also mentioned, mice and rats. I was telling Sarah and Morgan that I came in on Sunday to work on my slides, and before I could sit down and do that, I had to get a dead mouse out of a trap in the museum here. So the mice come up. And other threats can come up as well. We've had birds get into the building. We haven't had bats get into the building, but we've had them kind of hanging out near the front door. I worked at a place in Maryland that had a snake get into the building. So lots of different pests. I was not there the day the snake came in, so I didn't have to deal with that one. And this picture is the loading dock at the back of the art museum here on campus. In the very top corner, you might be able to see there's a swallow's nest there. We've had issues with that for a number of years here. And we have at one point scraped the nest down and then they built them back up. I haven't had the heart to do that yet, but I liked this as an example of the threat of birds getting into the building, because the door underneath the nest is where I come in and out of the building every day. So we try not to prop that door open. And then on the right side, that little bit of metal you can see is our loading dock rolling door. So especially in spring and summer, when we get deliveries and that door is open, we're really careful not to leave it open longer than we need to so the birds don't fly in. So understanding the needs of pests, what attracts them, is key to prevention. And similar to humans, pests need food and water and shelter and access points into your building. So how do we break the cycle of providing all of these things? You'll want to evaluate your access points. So if you do have doors where the weather stripping at the bottom is starting to fall apart, that would be worth making note of and replacing it. The camel crickets in my building, they like to nest right next to buildings and then they hatch and come in. So that one's not even a door as an access point, but I know that's where they're getting in. Avoid providing shelter as much as possible. So mice are a good example here. If there's a lot of boxes on the floor, mice will get in and nest in them. So we try not to put any boxes directly on the floor here. We'll put pallets down or foam, or just try to elevate boxes a little bit so they're off the ground. And food and drink policies are really important to have. Here at the Art Museum, we all eat in our offices every day, but any food consumption is kept in offices. We don't take food into the galleries ever. And all food trash goes into trash cans with covered lids so that it's less attractive to pests. Drink policies, when we are working on exhibit installations, we do usually have coffee and water in the galleries, but we make sure they're in containers with a covered lid. We keep them off to the side away from any of the artwork, so they're less likely to get spilled. And also any drink trash that you have goes into covered containers as well. So just trying to make sure food and drink is contained. You're not keeping crumbs on your desk if you had a little snack, and making sure that that gets taken out from the trash in the building every day. And then keeping everything really clean. I know that can be hard if you don't have dedicated custodial staff, but that means keeping offices clean, floors clean, even the storage areas for your collections. We have a schedule here where we do a deep clean of each storage area at a different time, just to make sure dust isn't building up. So some prevention strategies. We already talked about some basic ones there. But our first quick tip today is that your building is your first line of defense. And to keep your building as a good line of defense, you want to inspect exterior and access points regularly. So like I said, entrances and exits, other areas that could be access points for pests. Making sure you seal entry points. If you don't have weather stripping on the bottom of doors, run to Walmart, get some and add it on. And landscaping can attract pests as well. So going back to my camel cricket issue, they like to nest under rocks right against walls. So about once a year, I will go outside and move all of the rocks and weeds away from that wall. I'm a little surprised I haven't gotten yelled at by campus landscaping yet, but they have different needs than I do for the landscaping here. So just keeping an eye on that stuff too. Environmental controls are important, but can be more challenging. So as much as you can manage your temperature and humidity within the building, and certainly in storage areas, that's great. I personally do not have that ability here in my building. So I just have to monitor the temperature and humidity and make sure there's not drastic changes happening. Making sure your air filtration systems are up to date and have clean filters in them. And then lighting considerations as well. Mice don't like it when there's light, but if you have lights that get really hot that are on all the time, that can attract pests. We all know moths really like lights. So just being really thoughtful about the lights that you have as well. All right, best practices for housekeeping. Establish a regular cleaning schedule if you don't have one, and then most importantly, stick to it. And those food and drink policies are just so important. It seems like a minor thing for us, but really can attract a lot of pests. Regular maintenance of storage areas, which does include cleaning and making sure you're checking all the corners and under boxes, artwork, artifacts. And then establishing quarantine procedures for all new acquisitions. I know that one can be kind of tricky sometimes, but whenever we get something new here or we get a lot of artwork loaned to us for exhibitions, we have places that we put it that's away from all of our actual collection material and other artwork. And we usually let it sit for a couple of weeks before we open anything, just to make sure if there are any bugs that those go away before they start spreading. If you do get a donation, I know this can happen more often with archives, boxes of papers that have bugs in them. Freezing those as part of the quarantine can be a good option. I know the American Heritage Center here on campus had that issue once, and they were able to get a storage unit outside that they kept some boxes in the winter. So that was an easy freezing solution, just to make sure nothing got into the building, but those quarantine procedures can be really important. All right, monitoring and detection. Our next quick tip here, sorry, this is one of the grosser pictures I have. Early detection can save your collections. I use these glue traps for insects. You can get a 90 pack for like $20 on Amazon. I have a little over 100 of these in the museum parts of the building, and I replace them every 2 months. I replace all of them. That's a pretty labor-intensive option, but even just having these near doors and windows is really important. Having an inspection schedule and checklist. So like I said, I look at these every 2 months. I have a calendar reminder so that I have that day blocked off. And then staff training. This is not a one-person job. Everyone needs to be on board with insect and pest management. So we have a lot of part-time employees here. Every semester we do a training with them on emergency procedures and insect management. So everyone knows that they're supposed to call me if they find a bug, send me a picture of it, let me know where it was, and get it out of the building. But really making sure everyone is on the same page with the proper procedures is important. One thing I always tell people here is if it's a live bug, you don't want to squish it, because then you're potentially making the problem worse. You're just getting pieces of bug on the floor or in the building. So if it is a live bug, if you can capture it and take it out of the building, that's always a better option. So this image here, this is the first floor of the Centennial Complex, which is where the Art Museum and the American Heritage Center is on campus. And all of the dots and stars are where I have bug traps located on the museum side. So you can see there's a lot inside the building. Every room has traps right by the doors. We don't have a lot of windows down in this area, but our classroom is on the first floor. That has a lot of snacks and food in it because of the K through 12 groups. So they get some extra bug traps in there. but making sure those access points are really covered. And some of my rooms, if you can see in the picture, do have more than 2 traps. So some of them are also along external walls where we've had issues with insects getting in. These pictures show a good access point for mice. Even if you're not seeing mice, they're probably getting into the building. So this is the back door by our loading dock, again, just from the inside. In the picture on the left, you can kind of see where there's sunlight coming in. We know that's an access point where the weather stripping has fallen off the door, and we know we get mice in there. And then the picture on the right is just from a different angle of that same door, but that's where we have a mouse trap that gets a lot of traffic from the mice just because they can come in and walk along that wall and then try to get back into the art museum side. So for mouse traps, placing those along walls and close to access points is really key. Documentation systems. This is some examples of how we used to log pest sightings here at the art museum. And I'll show some examples of what we do now. But just making sure you do keep a log of everything that comes in, including general pest sightings. So if you just find a dead fly on the floor, taking note of that. That's kind of what the top chart is here. Those are ones we just kind of found all around, noting the date, what type, the location. And then keeping records of what is caught in sticky traps is important too, those glue traps. So every 2 months I replace all of those, and then myself and a student employee look through every single one and take a picture and try to identify the bugs and note how many there are. So on the bottom left, that's the system we used to use, just kind of a manual system using an Excel spreadsheet. I have templates for these that Morgan will share on the website if anyone needs to use an Excel spreadsheet to log these. And then the one on the right is kind of all of the bug traps combined for every time they would get reviewed. So just to see that full picture of how many pests we're getting in at a time. Photo documentation of pest, excuse me, is important. I know it's not fun to be taking photos of the pest. You don't have to keep them on your phone after you put them into your Excel spreadsheet or your other system, but that can be helpful in the long run as well. There's a number of technology tools that can be used for pest monitoring and environmental data. There's some digital monitoring systems, which I think my next slide shows what we use here. But you can also just get environmental data loggers. There's mobile apps that can be used for tracking. Some of the mobile apps pair with like hobo data loggers and things like that. So I use a system here called Conserve. I really love the system, but it is expensive. It's subscription-based, so it's not necessarily a good solution for all organizations depending on budget. But that does environmental monitoring, and I can also do my pest management monitoring in here. So as I mentioned, camel crickets have been a growing issue here, and this shows how many camel crickets have been in the building from 2022 until last month when I last checked the bug traps. And this is helpful because it shows me that the number of them coming in is increasing, and that they hatch in summer. So that's when I see most of them. But you can do this with Excel data too. If it's parsed out well enough, you can create charts with that as well. This is what my temperature and relative humidity look like in a new storage room that we have here. This is also in Conserve, so it's super helpful for just quickly being able to pull up on my computer or my phone the changes. And this looks like there's a lot of changes happening in the temperature, but it's actually a really small graph. It's 67.4 degrees up to 69.6 degrees. So those temperature fluctuations are not nearly as scary as they look. Some more affordable options for that environmental monitoring. As I mentioned, hobo data loggers, those are kind of the traditional museum solution for tracking temperature and relative humidity. The ones that they sell now, this one I just kind of randomly grabbed is $160, but it does have Bluetooth ability, so you can through your phone or computer, log in, download the data, and see if there are any trends with fluctuations in temperature or humidity. A really affordable solution would be just getting a digital hygrometer. Didn't practice saying that word in advance. $10 at Home Depot or Walmart, something like that. It doesn't connect to your phone or anything, so that one's more labor intensive. Someone would have to check it pretty much every day and log what the temperature and humidity are. But if needed, that's a really helpful solution for keeping track of that as well. So what are some safe response methods? Because pests will still get in no matter what. Our next quick tip here, some collection safe treatment options for infested materials. Freezing is a really good option if it's appropriate for the materials, usually 48 to 72 hours, and that can just be in a standard freezer or in a cooler. That will kill any insects, and certainly if there's any eggs or larvae, things that are harder to see and harder to remove, the freezing will kill those. Anoxic treatment is not one that I have a lot of experience with, but if you, depending on the material, that is a really safe way to treat an infestation. Anoxic treatment, you use certain materials to kind of encase the object or the artifact or the paper, and then you remove as much oxygen as possible because insects and other pests like us do need oxygen. And similar to the freezing, you would keep that in for a set amount of time. Anoxic treatment would be helpful for, I was trying to think of an example of where I would use this. We have a lot of artworks from Papua New Guinea in our collection, so they're tropical hardwoods. So it's already kind of not great for them to be in Wyoming, where it's not a tropical climate, but if those had an infestation that I needed to treat, freezing or heat would not be a good option. That would be one where I'd want to just remove the oxygen to keep the object safe. And heat is another option. I tend to default to freezing just because it's the easiest. And for most of the materials that I have that might get infested, freezing is a safe, appropriate option. And for all of these, you can just look up on Google or YouTube ways to do this if you do need to treat anything. So a recent example that I have from the art museum, we have some interesting things in our exhibitions right now that are outside of the norm of what we do. So these are images of a survival box. We have an exhibition of paintings, but this artist also makes these survival boxes from hand. And then he puts like a map, jerky, candle, matches, there's some sunflower seeds in there, things that if you were trapped in the wilderness would be helpful. And as an art project, he does leave these in remote spots out in nature, and then he doesn't track them. So he doesn't know if people ever pick them up, but we have one on display right now. And the first picture on the left is what the bottom of the box looked like when he delivered it to us. There's a lot of dead carpet beetles and pieces of dead carpet beetles in there. There were a few live ones in there that I got to remove as well. And the jerky was not contained in anything when he delivered this to us. So the Ziploc bag was the first thing I was able to grab to put the jerky in. And then we ran to the grocery store and got like a cheap jar of pasta sauce and dumped the pasta sauce out. And that's the jar that the jerky is now in. We washed it, so there's no additional food stuff in there. But about a month after the exhibition opened, I was walking by and I could see carpet beetles on the jerky. And I thought I had cleaned them all off, but clearly there were some eggs that hatched. And over Memorial Day weekend, we just put it in our freezer in the break room. I told everyone that it was there, and it was in a bag, so no one had to look at it. But that did stop the infestation. I haven't seen any other evidence since then. So this was a case where freezing was an appropriate solution. And then I got to clean all the carpet beetles off of the jerky again. So even if you think you've stopped an infestation, keep an eye on it. It may still be there. Emergency response procedures. You want to immediately isolate anything that has evidence of an infestation on it. And depending on your space, I know that can be a bit challenging if you don't have a lot of extra space, but it is really important to isolate any infested objects so that it doesn't get worse. And then you'll want to do an assessment, look at every spot on the item. If it's a piece of paper, that might be easier. If it's a book, you will want to look at every single page of that book and check the spine. So really making sure you assess the full scope of the issue and take pictures. And then that assessment will help figure out what triage is needed. And hopefully it's something that you could do with freezing or isolation or an anoxic treatment. If your response is not helping with the infestation, if it's just getting worse or it's still sticking around after months, that's when you might want to consider calling professionals. I think we all know we don't want chemicals around our collections, so we try not to call professional exterminators unless it's really, really needed. If you do have to resort to chemical controls, make sure you understand the risk to collections before any chemicals are used. So if a professional exterminator is coming in, do a walkthrough with them and ask questions about the chemicals, do your own research on the chemicals. Just really make sure that's a collaborative effort. It's not just someone coming in and spraying what they would normally spray. If it is something that needs to be applied by professionals, do use professionals because you do want to keep yourself and your staff safe in addition to the collections. And just to emphasize that staff safety, if there's chemicals that people shouldn't be around, making sure everyone knows what's going on and when, and scheduling that in advance. So staff training and policies are really important for pest management. Quick tip, everyone is a pest monitor. We will all see the pest, so everyone needs to be on board with helping with that. So make sure all staff and volunteers are trained on pest management and protocols. Have very clear reporting procedures. Our procedures here are written down, so like our front desk staff, they're the part-timers who change a lot. They have written instructions right at the front desk that tell them what to do, which is take a picture and notify me immediately. And we also have regular refresher sessions because people will get comfortable and not contribute as much as they should. So just those regular reminders on procedures is really important. Policy development. If you don't already have a policy, it's important to have one. And I would emphasize it's important to have a written integrated pest management policy that is easy for everyone to access and to have written emergency response protocols. I haven't touched too much on emergency procedures, but it's really important to have emergency procedure policies in place before you get an emergency. We'll talk near the end about some more options for that, but also to have guidelines for vendors or outside parties that come in. We have catering come into our building quite a lot, and they know that there's special rules here. They can't just leave food sitting out. So if there are vendors or outside parties that come in to your building a lot, we also do a lot of rentals of our space, and we always talk with those groups in advance about what the rules are, just to make sure that you're thinking about rules for people who are not in the space all the time, but making sure they know that your space is special. All right, so building your IPM program. I'd say the top 3 implementation priorities are to first assess your building for access points, food and shelter, areas that pests might like, or areas that you know have been problems. And once you've assessed your building, then draft and implement the policies and procedures based on that assessment and best practices, and then train everyone. So some budget-friendly options, because it doesn't need to cost a lot to do pest management and prevention. Some of those DIY monitoring tools that we talked about, like those Excel spreadsheets that Morgan has as templates, if that's all you're able to do, that's still great and still helpful. Some of those low-cost prevention measures, just having glue traps out, glue traps and mouse traps out, even if you don't replace them very often, just keeping an eye on them will help prevent insects from getting in. And then community resource sharing where that's possible. If you're in a building that's shared with another unit or entity, working with them to make sure they're on board with pest management as well. But if budget is tight, maybe they can help with getting some of the resources. I was even thinking about here in my building, we're in the same building as the archives on campus, the American Heritage Center, and I work with their collections manager frequently to make sure we're on the same page. We let each other know if we are having issues with mice or other pests coming in. And even if you're in your own museum building, but the budget is pretty limited, if there are other museums or similar entities in the community that you can maybe share resources with, just to make sure you're all getting what you need for pest management. So some recommendations of resources and networks. I really like the American Institute for Conservation. They have a great website with a ton of free resources readily available. And I have links to all of these recommendations that Morgan will share as well. So with AIC, they have a resources page that has lots of manuals for emergency response, pest management. They have free webinars available as well. That's their Connecting to Collections Care area. And I love those webinars. They're free, and then they post them on YouTube. So similar to this program, they're really helpful if you need to figure something out quickly. And they also, the Foundation for Advancement in Conservation has an app that I have on my phone. That's what those top two screenshots are. It's called the ERS app. So it's the Emergency Response and Salvage app. And I have never had to use it, but I downloaded it as soon as I learned about it. And it has step-by-step guides for every disaster. There's options for material-specific salvage techniques. So hopefully you never have to use it, but I do recommend having that on your phone just in case you need it, because then you don't have to download it in the moment. And Conserve, the system that I use for environmental and pest management, they do have what's called the Conserve community, which is free for anyone to join. There's a lot of active discussions on that page, which is super helpful. And they also do have some free webinars about integrated pest management and environmental monitoring. I haven't watched those. I suspect they plug their own products a bit in those, but some useful information there as well. And I did not include this as a resource, but I was telling Morgan before everyone hopped in that sometimes I will just look on YouTube and find AIC has great YouTube videos, but other museums have posted things that are really helpful too. So if you're not sure about how to approach anything, someone has probably put a good resource online for that. All right, I got through it a little quickly for us, but that leaves some extra time for questions and answers, discussion. I don't know if any questions came up in the chat there. Okay.
Hi, Molly. I was wondering if there's a specific tool that you use to identify what kind of bugs you've trapped.
That is an excellent question.
That was going to be my question. Thank you.
Good, yeah. And that's one I'm always experimenting with because I like my job, but as we were discussing in advance, this part's kind of gross and creepy and not my favorite part of the job. I do not like bugs or other pests. I'm hoping at some point I can take just the intro to insect biology through campus, but it's always offered at a horrible time for someone working a full-time job. One of the resources that Morgan will share is kind of common museum pests and with pictures of them. And those are most of what I get in the building, but sometimes I get really weird things on my glue traps that I've never seen before. And I usually just end up trying to Google until I find something similar, which is labor intensive and lots of creepy pictures on my phone. There is an app called Seek, which is a free app you can get on your phone that identifies plants and animals and insects. Sometimes it works, and sometimes if a bug has been on the glue trap for too long and it's kind of desiccated and not looking the way it used to, the app can't quite figure it out. So I'm always looking for new options for that. But I do hope the Seek app keeps getting better and that something might come out that is a little more helpful.
Yeah, I've tried some apps as well, and I found that a lot of the things I get are too small.
Yeah.
So the apps have an issue with scale for sure.
Yeah, I've run into that problem too.
Yeah.
And sometimes I just try to come up with my best guess of what an insect is.
Hi, Molly. Do you have any suggestions specifically for like clothing moths, wool moths?
Ooh, that's one I'm glad I haven't had to deal with too much in this position.
I bet.
Yeah. I would freeze things if I could, if there were moths on them. But I'd say even just putting them in like a plastic bag, or those space bags they used to sell for clothes. I would even try some of those and like just sucking the air out as much as possible and leaving it for a week or so.
Do you think any of the sticky traps would work for?
I get a lot of moths in my sticky traps.
Okay.
It's always surprising. I don't know how they end up in the traps, but and it's clear that they've been flying around in there a little bit too.
Yeah.
But
okay.
Yeah, the sticky traps do work for moths.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
The sticky traps do sometimes catch mice. That was actually what alerted me this weekend. Some of my sticky traps had moved. So if you're seeing sticky traps moving when ending up with gray fur on them a lot, that's probably a place you want to put a mouse trap next to it.
I have seen a sticky trap once from a rodent where the rodent decided to leave its foot behind. So that can also be a thing. Just thought people might want to know that.
Other questions or things that you've run into? This can be a discussion time as well.
Did you happen to mention if Conserve was a free program or if it was like a subscription based?
It's subscription based.
Okay.
Yeah, so that does get
not to pry too much.
No, that's okay.
Yeah.
And this wouldn't be an option anymore, but we were one of their first customers, so we still get a discount from kind of being one of their trial run places.
Okay.
But that can always be a good thing to keep an eye out for too. If there's new technology coming out, even if it's paid for, it might be a little bit cheaper if you kind of help them test it out.
Mm-hmm.
If it's in the budget, I really recommend it. It does make my life easier. I haven't set this up, but if I wanted to, I could set up on my phone that it would alert me if there's a big temperature or humidity spike. So it is really helpful. Unfortunately expensive.
Gotcha.
But their community board is free.
Okay.
And yeah, like I said, really helpful with the discussions there. And they're always good at advertising webinars from all over the world. That's usually how I end up seeing the webinars that the American Institute for Conservation has. Okay, so Sierra put a message in. How about spiders? Come across spiders when getting objects. That's a pretty common one. Glue traps do catch spiders, so if it's a new acquisition and you're able to isolate it, you could set some glue traps nearby. If they're living spiders, I usually just try to catch them and release them outside. But if they've laid any eggs or anything, that won't help. If there are spider webs on objects, I would recommend getting some of the Swiffer dry cloths, like for the Swiffer dry mop. If you just get the cloths, those are really good to use on collection material. And if it's archival material, those are helpful as well because they won't rub away pencil marks on anything. But yeah, if they're live spiders or if you're worried there's eggs, I would try freezing. Probably freezing more than heat. And just wiping off as much as you can with that Swiffer dry cloth. Yeah, I understand, Sierra. I've had to kind of tough up on bugs since I came into this job a few years ago. If you have someone else who could help with that.
Also, one thing that I find that helps even just my own brain is sometimes when I'm dealing with pests, I'll wear gloves.
I was just thinking that, yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, the gloves, even if they don't actually help, they help my brain.
Yes. Yeah, Sierra, that's a tough position to be in if you're working on getting a better building. I know that can cause a lot of issues and having to move things around, which can also increase pest. Yeah, if you have any way that you could, yeah, I was thinking of vacuum too, depending on what the items are and the vacuum.
They do make some like museum quality vacuums.
Yeah.
Where if you have extra, I know not a lot of us do have extra room in the budget, but if you're ever looking for something, that's a really great tool to use to help clean objects and get rid of pests and stuff. So
yeah, it would be a worthwhile investment.
When checking traps, I've had live spiders still stuck to the trap. And so I bought a pair of cheap kitchen tongs so I don't have to grab the trap with my hand.
Yeah, when I replace my traps, I usually have 1 or 2 live bugs still. And so when I replace the traps, I do try to review them and get them out of the building as quickly as possible too, for that reason. But yeah, I like the tongs.
they also
Definitely helps a lot too, because some of the spots where I have them, the lighting isn't the best. And so sometimes I'll just grab those ones with the tongs every time just because I can't see it.
Yeah, they also make I think it's like $10 like bug catcher tool. So if they're just not on your traps, that might be something to have on hand. I know I keep one at home personally, but so that might be another good tool that I can link on the website for you guys.
Oh, Sierra, I wish I had better advice for you. Yeah, feathers would be really tough, and regalia.
Unfortunately, their freezing is probably the best option.
Mm-hmm. Even just cleaning out like I know it doesn't sound very fun, but like a break room freezer, like getting a small freezer and sticking it in the break room could help.
Yeah.
But sometimes those can be pricey.
Yeah, and I don't know that this would help you if you have arachnophobia, but with some of our Papua New Guinea items, that's a fairly recent acquisition, and some of them also have feathers or pretty delicate parts. But I have a pair of tweezers that I specifically use for getting bugs and other things off of those.
This is kind of a weird question, but for home use in particular, they usually, there's a few places that recommend using essential oils. Do you think that that would cause more harm, or especially in a museum or archive setting? What are your thoughts about that, I guess?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I personally would try to avoid that in the museum. And I've seen discussions come up on the conserve community about essential oils. That one seems to pop up every couple of months. And there are places that do it. I would just want to make sure it's really contained and changed frequently. But personally, I would argue against that unless I felt like it was really, really needed. Well, as we've been talking, just some other thoughts that have popped into my head. Sarah's essential oil question reminded me that we have policies in our building about plants and flowers coming in. In theory, they're not supposed to come into the building at all, but my boss gets flowers delivered all the time to her office. So when we do get flowers in the building, I always go check them immediately and make sure there's no bugs or anything on them. And if anyone does get flowers delivered, they do have to be taken away that same day. They can't sit around. Sierra, I'm glad it's helpful for when you have a proper facility. I hope that's soon. And another thought that I had that I meant to mention about sharing community resources, or just when you have to work with other entities. Here on campus, when there's home football games, the Cowboy Joe Club rents out the empty field behind my building to campers and RVs. And we've had issues where they don't set up additional dumpsters. So everyone who's here for the football game uses the dumpsters for the art museum and the American Heritage Center. And I've definitely had mice come in after those weekends because there's food trash overflowing out of the dumpsters. And with that one, we've just had to work with the Cowboy Joe Club to tell them why that's an issue. And they now bring in extra dumpsters. So if you're seeing issues being caused with pests from an outside entity, as much as you can work with them, even if it's something that gets a little frustrating, to find a solution that works for everyone is really important. Other questions? Horror stories about pests?
I have a horror story. I'm not entirely sure what it is, but in our main lab space upstairs, next to one of the windows, I had a sticky trap that had some kind of bug on it. I strongly think it was a tick,
Ooh,
but I'm not 100% sure because it is a little funky looking. I saved a photo of it. I think it came off of field school students who were sitting in the loading dock.
That would make sense to me. Like if it doesn't, oh, sorry, someone popped up in the chat. But if someone brings me, because we don't think about that either, someone potentially having it on their person, which we can't just freeze a person, but it helps with the sticky stuff, right? Oh, Sierra, you have rats or mice in the ceilings and bed bugs. Oh, the bed bugs are so...
that's awful.
Sierra, I'm so sorry. I can say that your new building is going to be beautiful and it's going to help. So, yeah.
Yeah, I know pest management is it's extra challenging if you're not in a purpose-built museum or archives.
Mm-hmm. So. Sierra, if you want to go ahead, you can link the website if you would like. If not, that's okay. And I can hang on for another couple minutes. But anybody else have any questions, comments, horror stories?
Just a comment. Thank you so much for sharing all this information with us, Molly. A lot of us don't have a lot of resources, or I don't have an expertise in pest management, and so this has been really helpful introduction to it.
Oh, I'm glad. And my email address is up on the screen. If anyone has questions that come up later, feel free to reach out. So much of what we do in museums and archives is kind of figuring it out as we go.
Yeah.
With the resources we have.
I think that sets me up because Sarah kind of stole my next thing, which was to say thank you, Molly, for presenting today. No, it's okay. And thank you for all the tips and tricks you've shared. I'm really excited about this and just making it available for more people. Like I've said before, all of these materials, as well as the spreadsheets that Molly has talked about, will be available through the SHRAB website, and I'm also going to link them on the YouTube video, which that should be posted by tomorrow afternoon. And thinking about the fact that a lot of what we do is trial and error, our next quick tips, which I have very lovingly decided to call Collections Corner, is going to focus on creating that forum where we can all share like the different growth opportunities that our community or our collections have gone through, different questions about random little things that we work with. It's just space to kind of show and tell about how different organizations have grown over the course of the last year. And that will be on December 18th from 11:30 to 12:30. And yeah, perfect. I also have the chat up. I love having the chat up next to it because then I also read it as it's going. Sierra, you're fine. Yes, you guys do have a very small repository, but hopefully we can get you a bigger one.
Sharing
Trying anyway.
is hard.
Yeah. So, and like Molly said, if you have any further questions, comments, concerns, or anything, please feel free to reach out to either her or I, and via email, or for at least for me, you can also contact me through the SHRAB website, which will have all my contact forms on there. And I just want to say thank you all for participating today. And thank you again, Molly, for presenting and sharing all this, basically a crash course on pest management. And for those of you who have to go, we'll see you next time. So thank you all.